Desmond was 38 years old, made a respectable $78,000 a year as a respiratory therapist, and was standing in a river of grief so deep it threatened to pull him under. His mother, Eleanor, was gone. The weight of it was a physical presence, a crushing stone on his chest that made every breath, the very element he helped his patients command, a conscious and painful effort. He stood at the pulpit of the Allen Temple AME Church in Cincinnati, the warm wood worn smooth by generations of preachers and mourners. Below him, in the first pew, sat his wife, Paulette, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. The church was filled with the scent of lilies and roses, a sweet, cloying smell that felt like a mockery of the decay it was meant to hide. The casket, a simple but elegant mahogany that cost $4,200, rested just to his right. It contained the woman who had been his entire world, his anchor, his quiet champion. He gripped the sides of the lectern, his knuckles white. My mother, Eleanor Vance. She was a woman of quiet strength, he began, his voice thick but steady. He looked out over the faces, his aunts and uncles, their deep brown skin etched with sorrow. His mother's friends from the hospital where she had worked as a nurse for 40 years, members of their church community who had known him since he was a boy with scraped knees. They were his people. Their collective grief was a blanket, heavy but warm. Then his eyes found Paulette. She was immaculate, a portrait of somber elegance in a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than his first car, a simple $3,500 affair. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked less like a grieving daughter-in-law and more like an actress playing a role. Beside her, Lily was a small, still figure in a black velvet dress, her beautiful hair pulled back in 2 neat twists, the colorful beads at the ends clicking softly when she shifted. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and full of a child's pure, uncomprehending sadness. He gave her a weak, reassuring smile. He spoke of his mother's hands, how they could soothe a fever or knead dough for the sweet potato pies that were legendary in their family. He spoke of her laugh, a low, rumbling sound that could fill a whole house. He felt the words catching in his throat. He paused, taking a ragged breath. In that sliver of silence, Paulette leaned toward him. It was a subtle movement, barely perceptible to anyone beyond the first pew. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the casket. Her voice was a venomous whisper, a sound colder than the February air outside. She always wanted better for her son than this. The words sliced through the fog of his grief with surgical precision. This. She meant him, his job, his life, his eulogy, his very being. It wasn't just an insult, it was a judgment, delivered at the most sacred and vulnerable moment of his life. 3 feet away, Lily, his precious daughter, squeezed his hand. A silent, intuitive gesture of comfort. She had heard. He knew she had. The shame burned hotter than the grief. His wife's family, her mother and sister sitting next to her, shifted uncomfortably. A faint, suppressed smirk played on her sister Veronica's lips. They were laughing at him. Not a loud, boisterous laugh, but a quiet, internal mockery that was 1,000 times more cruel. They were laughing at him while he eulogized his mother. He felt a sudden, chilling clarity. The world snapped into sharp, painful focus. He looked at Paulette, truly looked at her, and saw not his wife, but a stranger, a predator who had chosen this moment of his deepest pain to strike. He had no idea how right he was. The coordinated attack had already begun, hours before the first hymn was sung. What do you do when the person who vowed to love and support you reveals themselves as your greatest enemy at your mother's funeral? How do you keep standing? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Because Desmond's story is a testament to the fact that sometimes the quietest people have the most powerful resolve. The facade of their marriage had been built on a foundation of such subtle cracks that Desmond had trained himself not to see them. Their life together was a carefully curated picture of domestic normalcy, but every detail was dollar-tagged, a constant, unspoken reminder of the chasm between their worlds. They lived in a modest but well-kept three-bedroom house in Pleasant Ridge, a neighborhood he loved for its old trees and diverse families. The down payment, a significant $35,000, had been a gift from his mother, a fact Paulette never mentioned when her friends from Indian Hill came to visit. A typical Saturday morning painted the picture perfectly. Desmond would be up at 6 a.m., the habit of a hospital shift worker ingrained in him. He'd be in the kitchen, wearing a faded $15 t-shirt from his college days and a pair of worn sweatpants, making pancakes for Lily. The aroma of batter and melting butter would fill the small house, a smell of pure, uncomplicated love. He'd hum along to the gospel station on the small kitchen radio, a $25 Sony that had been his mother's. Paulette would emerge around 9:30 a.m., gliding into the room in a silk pajama set that cost $450. She'd pour herself a coffee into a specific porcelain mug, part of a set that cost $80 per cup, and scroll through her phone. "Good morning," Desmond would say, sliding a plate with a smiling pancake onto Lily's placemat. "Morning," Paulette would reply, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Did you remember to take the recycling out? The neighbors are complaining again." The contrast was stark and constant. His car was a reliable 2015 Honda Accord with over 100,000 miles on it, its blue book value hovering around $9,000. Hers was a gleaming white Lexus RX 350, a $65,000 vehicle she leased for $800 a month, a cost she frequently complained about even though her parents covered half of it. When they went out, he wore his best, a clean, pressed $80 button-down shirt and a pair of $100 Dockers. She would be dressed in a $2,400 Burberry trench coat or a dress from a designer he'd never heard of, its price tag equivalent to a month of his take-home pay. Her family, the wealthy and powerful Morgans of Indian Hill, treated him with a polite but chilling condescension. Dinners at their sprawling $4 million estate were an exercise in quiet humiliation. Her father, a corporate lawyer who billed at $1,500 an hour, would ask him questions about his job with feigned interest. "So, Desmond, you help people breathe?" Fascinating. Is there much of a future in that? The implication was clear. It was a trade, not a profession. A job for your hands, not your mind. Her mother, a woman who wore her wealth like armor, would offer backhanded compliments. "It's so noble what you do, Desmond. Working with the sick. I could never. All those germs." She'd say this while adjusting a diamond bracelet worth more than his annual salary. Desmond endured it for Lily. He saw the way his daughter's face lit up when their two worlds merged, however imperfectly. He wanted her to have the stability he never had, the presence of two parents in one home. So he swallowed the insults, absorbed the condescension, and focused on the small moments of joy, reading bedtime stories to Lily, teaching her how to ride her $150 bicycle in the park, the feel of her small hand in his. His mother, Eleanor, had seen it all. She never criticized Paulette directly, but her love for Desmond was a fierce, protective shield. When they needed a new water heater, a sudden $1,800 expense, Eleanor had quietly written a check. When Lily needed braces, and Paulette was complaining about the $6,000 cost not being fully covered by her terrible insurance plan, Eleanor had set up a separate account and deposited the full amount. "For my grandbaby," she'd said, pressing the bank slip into his hand. Don't you worry about a thing." Paulette had accepted the money without a word of thanks to Eleanor. She saw it as her due, a small contribution from the other side of the family. She had no idea that Eleanor, with a nurse's keen eye for symptoms, had diagnosed the sickness in her son's marriage long before anyone else, and with a planner's foresight, she had already begun preparing the cure. The cruelty did not begin at the funeral. It had been escalating for months, a slow, creeping poison that seeped into the final precious days of his mother's life. Eleanor's cancer diagnosis had been swift and brutal. One month, she was planning a trip to see the cherry blossoms in D.C. The next, she was confined to her small, neat home, the same one Desmond grew up in with hospice care. Desmond rearranged his entire life. He switched to the night shift at the hospital, a grueling schedule that paid a slight premium, but allowed him to be with his mother during the day. He would arrive at her house at 7:30 a.m., his body aching with fatigue, but his heart full of purpose. He'd make her tea, help her with her medications, read to her from the Bible, and just sit with her, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of sleep. These were sacred hours, each one a gift. Paulette saw them as an inconvenience. "You're going to burn out, Desmond," she'd say, not with concern, but with annoyance. "You can't keep this up. They have nurses for this." "She's my mother, Paulette," he'd reply, his voice weary. "I want to be there." "And what about your family here?" she'd counter. "Lily misses you. I'm having to handle everything on my own." Everything usually meant coordinating with the landscapers for their $300 a month lawn service or taking her Lexus for its $250 oil change. The financial complaints began to surface, sharp and ugly. The hospice copays were $50 per visit, 3 times a week. "Another $150, Paulette sighed one evening, tossing the bill onto the kitchen counter. "It all just adds up." She said this while unboxing a new pair of Stuart Weitzman boots she'd ordered online, a sleek black leather pair that cost $900. The contrast was so grotesque, so utterly lacking in self-awareness, that Desmond felt a profound wave of nausea. He said nothing. He just picked up the bill and placed it with the others he planned to pay from his own account. Her family's involvement was even worse. Her sister Veronica called one afternoon while Desmond was measuring out his mother's morphine. Paulette put the call on speakerphone, a habit he despised. "So, how is she?" Veronica asked, her voice dripping with the kind of sympathy that feels more like morbid curiosity. "She's resting," Paulette said. There was a pause, and then Veronica's voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial. "Have you guys, gotten the will sorted? Dad says it can be a real mess if the paperwork isn't in order. You need to make sure Desmond knows what he's doing." Desmond froze, the small plastic syringe in his hand. They were talking about his mother's death as a financial transaction, a potential mess to be managed. He looked at Paulette, expecting her to shut it down, to defend his and his mother's dignity. Instead, she said, "I'm trying, V, but he's so emotional about everything right now. It's hard to get him to think practically." He walked out of the room. He couldn't breathe. He went into the backyard and stood in the cold air, his fists clenched. The betrayal was a physical pain, a hot knife in his gut. He was emotional. His mother was dying, and he was being emotional. The worst moment came a week before his mother passed. She had a brief period of lucidity, her mind clear and sharp for the first time in days. She asked for Paulette. Desmond called his wife, who was out having lunch with friends at Soto, a downtown restaurant where the entrees started at $40. "Can you come? She's asking for you," he pleaded, his voice low. "I'm in the middle of something, Desmond," she said, an audible sigh of exasperation in her voice. "Can't it wait?" "Paulette, I don't think we have much time." She arrived an hour later, smelling of expensive perfume and wine. She stood in the doorway of his mother's bedroom, her arms crossed, a look of profound impatience on her face. Eleanor, frail and small in her hospital bed, looked at her daughter-in-law. "Paulette," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "You take care of my boy and my grandbaby. You promise me." Paulette forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Eleanor. Don't you worry." She stayed for exactly 10 minutes, checking her $4,000 Cartier watch twice. As she left, she pulled Desmond into the hallway. "Okay, I came," she said, as if she had completed a tedious chore. "I have to get going. I have a facial appointment at 3 o'clock and I can't cancel it again. They charge you the full $250. She turned and walked away. Desmond stood there, his heart shattering into a million pieces. He watched her get into her pristine Lexus and drive off, leaving him alone in the quiet house with his dying mother. The cost of her facial was 5 times the hospice copay she complained about. The numbers didn't just represent money, they represented a complete and utter bankruptcy of her soul. He went back into his mother's room, sat down and took her hand. A single tear escaped his eye and fell onto their joined fingers. His mother, even in her weakened state, squeezed his hand. She knew. She had always known. And she had made a plan. The day after the funeral was a vacuum. The house, which had been filled with the low hum of visiting family and the scent of condolence casseroles, was now unnervingly silent. Lily was with his aunt, giving him a few hours to himself. He should have been resting, letting the exhaustion of the past weeks wash over him. Instead, he felt a restless need to be productive, to impose order on the chaos of his life. He decided to tackle the mountain of paperwork that had accumulated. He sat down at the small desk in the corner of their living room. On it was the family laptop, a sleek 13-inch MacBook Pro that Paulette had insisted they buy for $2,200 2 years ago. He rarely used it. He had his own older, slower Dell for personal emails and browsing. But the invoice for the funeral flowers was in Paulette's email, and he needed it for the estate records. The flowers had been beautiful, a cascade of white roses and lilies over the mahogany casket. But the cost, $1,250, was something he needed to formally account for. He opened the laptop. It whirred to life, and the screen illuminated, displaying the last session that had been open. He expected to see a news site or a shopping page. Instead, the screen was filled with the clean, white interface of a Gmail account. Paulette's account. She must have forgotten to close the browser. And it wasn't the inbox that was open. It was the sent folder. His eyes scanned the list of messages, and then he saw it. The top entry. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, filled his stomach. To covington.esq@crawfordlegal.com. Subject, asset list before the estate settles. Sent, Tuesday, February 21st, 9:14. AM time seemed to stop. 9:14 a.m. He did the math in his head. The funeral service was at 11 a.m. The limousine carrying his mother's casket had left the funeral home at 9 a.m. to travel to the church. At 9:14 a.m., while he was putting on his suit, his heart a raw, open wound. While his daughter was getting her hair twisted by his aunt. While his mother's body was on its final journey, his wife was emailing a divorce attorney. His hand trembled as he moved the cursor and clicked on the email. The message opened. It was short, brutally efficient, and utterly devoid of emotion. Mr. Covington, per our discussion, please find the preliminary list of assets to consider in the filing. I want to move quickly on this before the estate is formally settled, as I believe my husband may be the primary beneficiary of his mother's life insurance policy and other investments. Please advise on the best strategy to ensure these are classified as marital assets. Assets. Marital home, Pleasant Ridge. Approximate value $320,000. Equity approximately $95,000. Desmond's 401k. Approximate $110,000. My 401k. Approximately $45,000. Vehicles: 2015 Honda Accord, 2022 Lexus RX 350 lease. Anticipated inheritance: Eleanor Vance estate. Estimated $300,000 to $400,000. Life insurance, savings, property sale. Thank you, Paulette Morgan Vance. He read it once, then twice. The words swam before his eyes. Anticipated inheritance. She had already calculated it, appraised it, and was strategizing how to claim her share. The cruelty of her whisper at the eulogy was nothing compared to this. This was premeditated. This was a cold, calculated financial strike, financial make, planned and executed during the darkest hour of his life. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to grow louder, filling the silent room. Dust motes danced in the sliver of gray light coming through the window. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were floating above his own body, watching a scene from a movie. The grief for his mother was suddenly eclipsed by a new, more terrible feeling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was the chilling, absolute certainty of betrayal. He looked at his own hands resting on the keyboard. They were the hands of a respiratory therapist. They knew how to be gentle, how to be precise, how to manage the delicate mechanics of life and breath. And in that moment, a new kind of resolve settled over him, as cold and hard as steel. He took a slow, deep breath. Then he carefully, methodically, printed the email. He printed the entire screen, including the timestamp. Then he forwarded the email to his own personal address. He closed the browser, cleared the history, and shut down the laptop, leaving it exactly as he had found it. The storm had come, and his mother had given him a map. The days that followed the discovery were a masterclass in strategic restraint. A cold, clear purpose had replaced Desmond's grief-stricken fog. He was no longer a victim. He was a strategist. He moved through his home like a ghost, his face a calm, unreadable mask. He was playing a part, the grieving husband and son, while underneath, he was a general gathering intelligence before a battle. Paulette returned home that evening, dropping her $1,500 leather tote bag on the floor. God, what a day, she sighed, sinking onto the sofa. I had lunch with Veronica, just trying to get my mind off things. Oh, Desmond said from the kitchen, his voice even. He was washing the few dishes in the sink. Where did you go? Just that little cafe in Hyde Park Square, she lied, waving a dismissive hand. He knew she'd been at Alfio's, the upscale Italian place where lunch for two easily cost $100. He had seen the charge pending on their shared credit card account that morning. Every lie was another piece of evidence, another brick in the wall he was building around himself. Sounds nice, he said. He dried his hands on a simple $3 dish towel. Did you need the laptop for anything? I was going to pay some bills. Her body tensed for a fraction of a second, a flicker of panic in her eyes before it was smoothed over. Oh no, I'm too exhausted to even think about finances tonight, she said, her voice laced with manufactured weariness. You handle it. Lie number 2. She didn't want him anywhere near that laptop. He felt a grim satisfaction. He had been right to be careful. The next morning, he made Lily breakfast before Paulette was even awake. He sat with his daughter at the small kitchen table, the two of them cocooned in the quiet morning light. Lily, with the unfiltered honesty of a child, was trying to make sense of the world. Daddy, why was Mommy whispering at Grandma's church? She asked, her brow furrowed. She was coloring. Her tongue stuck out in concentration. Desmond's heart ached. He chose his words carefully, protecting her innocence at all costs. Mommy was just very sad, sweetie. Sometimes when grown-ups are sad, They say things that don't make much sense. It was a weak explanation, but it was all he could give her. He would never let her see the ugliness. She was the one pure, good thing in all of this. "I'm drawing a picture for Grandma," Lily announced, changing the subject as children do. "It's for her in heaven." She pushed the paper across the table. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bold strokes of a brown crayon. A tall figure with neat, short locks like his. A smaller figure beside him with twists in her hair and colorful beads just like hers. And floating above them, a figure with a glowing halo. "That's Grandma Eleanor," she said, pointing with the crayon. "And that's you, and that's me. We're a family." She had used the darkest brown crayon for their skin, a detail so specific and loving it brought tears to his eyes. He saw their blackness, their family, reflected in her art. "It's the most beautiful picture I have ever seen," he said, his voice thick. He carefully folded the drawing and put it in his pocket. It felt like a sacred text, a reminder of what he was fighting for. Later that day, Paulette was on the phone in the other room, her voice a low murmur. He walked past the door and heard her say, "Yes, Mr. Covington. I understand. Discretion is key." She was talking to her lawyer. He felt nothing but a cold confirmation. He walked back into the living room, picked up his keys, and went out. He had his own phone call to make. He sat in his 2015 Honda Accord, the engine off, and dialed a number he knew by heart. The number for Mr. Abernathy, his mother's lawyer, and his late father's oldest friend. "Mr. Abernathy," he said, when the older man answered, "It's Desmond Vance. I need to come see you. I think I'm in a storm." The offices of Abernathy and Sons were on the 12th floor of a modest but dignified building on Vine Street in downtown Cincinnati. It was a world away from the glass and steel towers that housed the law firms of Paulette's father. The lobby was quiet, paneled in dark wood, and smelled of old books and lemon polish. Mr. Abernathy, a kind, portly black man in his late 60s with a fringe of white hair, greeted Desmond with a warm, sad smile. "Desmond, my boy, I am so sorry for your loss. Your mother was one of the finest women I have ever known." "Thank you, sir," Desmond said, his voice quiet. They sat in Mr. Abernathy's office, surrounded by shelves groaning under the weight of law books. A picture of Mr. Abernathy and Desmond's father on a fishing trip 30 years ago sat on the corner of the desk. "What's this storm you mentioned?" Mr. Abernathy asked, his expression shifting from sympathy to professional concern. Desmond said nothing. He simply slid a folder across the polished mahogany desk. Inside was the printout of Paulette's email to her attorney. Mr. Abernathy put on his reading glasses, a simple $150 pair from LensCrafters, and read it. His jaw tightened. He read it again, his lips a thin, hard line. He looked up at Desmond, his eyes full of a cold, righteous anger. 9:14 a.m., Mr. Abernathy said, his voice a low growl, the unmitigated gall. He looked at the itemized list. "She's coming for the inheritance. She's classifying your mother's life savings as a marital asset." "That's what I thought," Desmond said calmly. "This is predatory, Desmond. This is a level of avarice I have rarely seen." "Mr." Abernathy took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Legally, she has a claim. In Ohio, an inheritance received during the marriage can be considered marital property unless specifically excluded." Desmond reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a long, sealed envelope made of thick, creamy paper. His mother's elegant, looping handwriting was on the front. "For my son, Desmond," it read. He placed it on the desk next to the printout of Paulette's email. "My mother gave this to me about 2 months ago," Desmond said. "She told me not to open it unless I felt I was in a storm I couldn't see the other side of." Mr. Abernathy picked up the envelope, handling it with a reverence usually reserved for ancient artifacts. He examined the heavy wax seal on the back, stamped with an E for Eleanor. It was unbroken. "May I?" he asked. Desmond nodded. With a small silver letter opener, Mr. Abernathy carefully sliced open the envelope. He unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It was a formal document, a notarized codicil to her will. He read it silently, his eyebrows rising higher with each line. When he finished, he let out a long, slow whistle. "Desmond," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Your mother was a brilliant woman, a strategist of the highest order." He turned the document around for Desmond to read. "Codicil to the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance, dated December 18th. I, Eleanor Vance, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be a codicil to my last will and testament. Article 1. I hereby amend my will to make a specific bequest. I direct that the full proceeds of my life insurance policy with Prudential, policy number 774-B-92, valued at approximately $200,000, and the full balance of my investment account with Vanguard, account number 588-312, valued at approximately $140,000, for a total of $340,000, be designated as a sole and separate gift to my beloved son, Desmond Vance. Article 2. It is my express and unequivocal intent that this gift shall not be considered a marital asset. This bequest is made for the purposes of the emotional and financial preservation of my son, in recognition of his unwavering love and sacrifice, and to provide him with security independent of any marital considerations. This provision is made with clear foresight and is non-negotiable." The document was signed by his mother, and below her signature was the stamp and signature of a notary public, dated 4 months before Paulette's email. "She knew," Desmond whispered, a wave of love for his mother so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. "She knew." "She more than knew, son," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice ringing with admiration. "She legally firewalled your inheritance from your wife." This document, with its specific language, sole and separate gift, independent of any marital considerations, emotional and financial preservation, is ironclad, especially when presented alongside this. He tapped the printout of Paulette's email. The timing of her actions provides the context for your mother's foresight. It paints a picture for any judge, a picture of a wise mother protecting her son from a predatory spouse. A plan began to form in the quiet office, a strategy as precise and methodical as a surgical procedure. There would be no shouting, no messy confrontations. There would only be the cold, hard truth delivered in a public forum by the voice of the woman Paulette had so grievously underestimated. The repast was held in the fellowship hall of the Allen Temple AME Church, a large warm room directly beneath the sanctuary where they had just said their final goodbyes. The air was thick with the comforting smells of fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, and collard greens, a feast prepared by the women of the church, a community showing its love through food. The catering, a supplemental spread of sandwiches and salads for guests with different tastes, had cost the estate $3,500, a bill Desmond had already approved. The room was filled with the low murmur of conversation as friends and family shared stories about Eleanor. It was a sea of black faces, a tapestry of shared history and grief. Desmond stood by a large window, looking out at the steady drizzle of rain that slicked the Cincinnati streets. He held a paper plate with a small portion of food he had no appetite for. He felt strangely calm, detached from his own body. He was an actor waiting for his cue. Across the room, Paulette and her family had formed a small, isolated island of wealth. Her father, mother, and sister Veronica, stood together speaking in low tones, their expensive dark suits and dresses a stark contrast to the more humble attire of his family. They looked uncomfortable, out of place, like anthropologists observing a foreign tribe. Paulette held a glass of iced tea, her posture rigid. She kept glancing at Desmond, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She wanted this to be over. She had a timeline to keep, a divorce to file, assets to secure. At exactly 2:30 p.m., the main doors of the fellowship hall opened. Mr. Abernathy entered, his expression grave. He carried a leather briefcase. He walked directly to the small podium at the front of the room, which was usually used for church announcements. He nodded once to Desmond, a small, almost imperceptible signal. This was it. Mr. Abernathy tapped the microphone. "Excuse me, everyone," he said, his deep voice cutting through the chatter. "May I have your attention for just a moment?" The room fell silent. People turned in their seats, forks pausing mid-air. Paulette looked up, her expression a mixture of curiosity and irritation. What was this interruption? "My name is Howard Abernathy," he began. "I was Eleanor Vance's attorney, and her friend for over 40 years. Before we conclude this time of fellowship, her son, Desmond, has asked me to share one final message from her." A wave of emotion rippled through the room. A final message. It sounded beautiful, poignant. Paulette's expression softened slightly. Perhaps this would be a sentimental poem or a passage of scripture. She settled in, adopting a look of somber attentiveness. She had made a critical mistake. Mr. Abernathy put on his reading glasses and pulled a single, thick sheet of cream-colored paper from his briefcase. It was the codicil. "This is a legal document," Mr. Abernathy stated, his voice clear and formal. "A notarized codicil to Eleanor's will, which she entrusted to her son. She asked that it be read in a time of need. Desmond feels that time is now." He began to read. "I, Eleanor Vance, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be a codicil to my last will and testament." He read through the first article, detailing the specific amounts: the $200,000 life insurance policy, the $140,000 investment account. The numbers hung in the air, concrete and substantial. A low gasp went through the room. It was a significant sum of money. Paulette's eyes widened. This was it, the prize. Her posture straightened. Then Mr. Abernathy moved to the second article. He slowed his pace, his voice becoming more deliberate, each word landing like a hammer blow in the silent room. Article 2. It is my express and unequivocal intent that this gift shall not be considered a marital asset. Paulette's face, which had been alight with greedy anticipation, froze. The color began to drain from it, leaving behind a sickly, pale mask. Her mother and sister exchanged a shocked glance. Mr. Abernathy continued, his eyes fixed on Paulette. "This bequest is made for the purposes of the emotional and financial preservation of my son." He paused, letting the words sink in. Emotional and financial preservation. It was a direct indictment. In recognition of his unwavering love and sacrifice, and to provide him with security independent of any marital considerations. Paulette's mouth fell open slightly. Her perfectly applied mask of composure was cracking. She looked around the room and saw that every eye was on her. The faces of Desmond's family were no longer just sad. They were hard, knowing, and full of judgment. Mr. Abernathy delivered the final line. "This provision is made with clear foresight and is non-negotiable." He folded the paper and placed it back in his briefcase. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was broken by a single sharp sound. Paulette's sister Veronica dropped her fork. It clattered loudly on her plate. Paulette stared at Desmond, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror, disbelief, and incandescent rage. He met her gaze, his expression completely blank. He felt nothing. Not triumph, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just the cold, quiet finality of a door swinging shut. He had not said a word. He didn't have to. His mother, from beyond the grave, had said it all. The consequences cascaded not with a loud bang, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a collapsing building. Paulette's world, built on a scaffolding of wealth, social standing, and perceived superiority, began to fall apart piece by public piece. Week 1. The first domino fell the very next day. At 10:02 a.m., Desmond received an email. It wasn't from Paulette, but from her attorney, Mr. Covington. The subject line was curt: withdrawal of intent. The body of the email was even more brief, stating that his client, Paulette Morgan Vance, was formally withdrawing her petition for divorce and all associated discovery requests. It was a full retreat, but the damage was done. The initial filing, made just days before, was now a public record in the Hamilton County Courthouse, a digital breadcrumb leading directly back to her greed. Later that afternoon, Desmond's phone buzzed with a voicemail. It was Paulette, her voice a frantic, high-pitched whisper. "Desmond, call me. We need to talk about what happened. That was a disgusting, manipulative spectacle. You ambushed me. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Call me now." He deleted the message without a flicker of emotion. Week 2. The story began to circulate through the manicured lawns and exclusive country clubs of Indian Hill. Public records are the morning paper for the wealthy and the litigious. The narrative was brutal and impossible for Paulette to spin. She had filed for divorce from her grieving husband the day of his mother's funeral to get her hands on an inheritance that the dead woman had already, with chilling foresight, protected from her. Paulette's mother, Caroline Morgan, called Desmond's cell, screaming, "How dare you! How dare you air our family's private business in a church basement? You have ruined her. You are a vindictive, pathetic little man." Desmond listened silently for a moment before saying, "Goodbye, Carolyn," and hanging up. Week 3. The social execution was swift. Paulette was the president of the Parent Association at the Seven Hills School, Lily's elite private school where tuition was a staggering $28,000 a year. It was a position she adored, one that gave her power and prestige. She received a call from the headmaster, who informed her that, due to unforeseen personal matters that may prove a distraction, it would be best if she stepped down from her role, effective immediately. Everyone knew the real reason. The mothers who had once vied for her approval now whispered behind her back in the drop-off line. Month 2. The humiliation became public and undeniable. Paulette, attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy, attended the school's annual spring gala, a major fundraising event. She wore a stunning, backless $3,000 gown. As she approached a group of women she considered her closest friends, the circle tightened, physically excluding her. One woman, the wife of a federal judge, turned to her and said, her voice quiet but carrying in the suddenly silent space, "Paulette, I don't think this is the place for you right now." The rejection was absolute. Paulette turned and fled the event, her face a mask of shame. Month 3. The financial support system she had always taken for granted began to crumble. Her father, furious at the public embarrassment and the stain on the Morgan family name, cut off the informal monthly allowance he had always provided her. The $800 monthly lease payment on her Lexus RX 350 was now solely her responsibility. Her credit card company, likely alerted to the divorce filing and her changed circumstances, reduced the limit on her American Express Platinum card from $50,000 to $5,000. The easy, frictionless river of money she had floated on her entire life had dried up. Month 4. The final break. She could no longer stand to live in the house in Pleasant Ridge, a monument to her defeat. She moved out, renting a small, overpriced one-bedroom apartment in Hyde Park for $1,800 a month. The day after she left, Desmond hired a locksmith for $250 and had all the locks changed. That night, his phone lit up with a series of messages, a perfect timeline of her emotional collapse. 8:15 p.m. Text. Did you change the locks? I need to get the rest of my things. 8:45 p.m. Text. Desmond, answer me. This is petty and childish. 9:30 p.m. Voicemail. You can't do this. That is my home too. I will call the police. You think you're so smart with your little lawyer and your mother's stupid letter, but you've destroyed our family. For what? For money. Click. 10:15 p.m. Voicemail, voice cracking. Please, Des, please, let's just talk. I made a mistake. I was grieving too, you know. I wasn't thinking clearly. Please don't do this to me. Don't do this to Lily. 11 p.m. Voicemail, quiet, defeated, crying. I've lost everything, everything. You won. I hope you're happy. He listened to the final message, the sound of her quiet sobs filling the silence of his now empty house. He did not feel happy. He did not feel victorious. He felt a profound, aching emptiness. The battle was over. The cost had been immense. But for the first time in a very long time, he felt free. 2 years passed. The rain of that funereal February had given way to the warm, life-giving sun of a Cincinnati spring. The change in seasons mirrored the transformation in Desmond's life. The raw, gaping wound of grief and betrayal had slowly, painstakingly begun to heal, leaving behind a scar that was a part of him now, a reminder of both pain and resilience. On a quiet corner in his Pleasant Ridge neighborhood, on a formerly vacant lot overrun with weeds, there was now a vibrant, thriving community garden. Raised beds overflowed with tomatoes, kale, and peppers. A kaleidoscope of zinnias and marigolds attracted buzzing bees. A simple, hand-carved wooden sign stood at the entrance, Eleanor's Garden. Desmond had used a small portion of the inheritance, about $50,000, to purchase the lot from the city and establish the garden as a non-profit. It was a place for the community to gather, to grow their own food, to connect with the earth and with each other. It was a living tribute to his mother, a woman who believed in nurturing growth in all its forms. On this particular Saturday afternoon, Desmond was in the small, repurposed building at the back of the garden. He was still in his light blue hospital scrubs, having come straight from a 12-hour shift. The name on the door, painted in simple, elegant letters, read, The Eleanor Vance Center for Community Healing. Inside, a small group of 6 people sat in a circle of mismatched but comfortable chairs. They were all healthcare workers, nurses, paramedics, other therapists. This was another project he had started. Free, informal grief and stress support sessions for his colleagues, people who dealt with life and death every day but rarely had a space to process their own burdens. And then, the patient's son, a young nurse was saying, her voice trembling slightly. He just looked at me and said, "You didn't do enough." And I just fell apart later. Desmond listened, his expression full of a deep, earned empathy. "That's not your burden to carry," he said gently. "You carry their breath. You don't have to carry their sorrow too. We can leave some of that here, in this room." He had found a new purpose, a way to channel his pain into healing for others. It wasn't a grand gesture, but a quiet, steady act of service. It was the truest expression of his mother's legacy. Later, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, he was outside, watering a row of tomato plants. A small figure ran up to him, her braids bouncing, the beads at the ends clicking a happy, familiar rhythm. It was Lily, now a bright and confident 8-year-old. She spent weekends with him, and these hours were the most precious of his week. "Daddy, look," she said, her voice full of breathless excitement. She held up a piece of paper. It was a new drawing. This one was of the garden, a large, smiling sun, a riot of colorful flowers, and two figures in the middle. One was a tall man with locks, holding a watering can. The other was a little girl with braids, holding a bright red tomato. Underneath, in a child's careful printing, it said, "My dad, and me, and Grandma's garden." He took the drawing, his heart swelling with a love so pure it was almost painful. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said, and he meant it. He knelt down and hugged her tightly, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her shampoo and the sunshine. True wealth, he now understood, had nothing to do with the numbers in a bank account or the zip code you lived in. It wasn't found in a $65,000 Lexus or a $2,400 dress. True wealth was the feeling of soil on your hands. It was the shared silence in a room of people who understood your exhaustion. It was the sound of your daughter's laughter. It was the quiet, unshakable love that could reach across even the boundary of death to protect you. He had heard, through the grapevine of his old life, that Paulette had moved to Chicago, that she was working in some junior marketing role. He rarely thought of her anymore, and when he did, it was with a distant, detached pity. He hoped she had found what she was looking for. He, on the other hand, had found everything he ever needed right here, in a small garden in Cincinnati, with his mother's name on the door and his daughter's hand in his. His life wasn't about assets to be tallied, but about love to be nurtured. And in that, he was the richest man he knew. Sometimes the deepest betrayals clear a path to our most authentic lives. Have you ever seen a painful ending become a beautiful new beginning? Share your story of resilience in the comments below, and let's celebrate the strength it takes to grow something new from broken ground.